Hi, and welcome to the only podcast bringing you original stories of hope, starting at only 5 words or less. My name is Kyle, and this is the Hopefully Prompt podcast, where artists from all over the world are sending me their original stories of hope based on the same 5-word prompt. The first series, that prompt was the man or woman was alone. Today I have an original story written by Brent A. Harris. Brent Harris is a fantastic fiction writer living here in the United States, and his work includes a wonderful steampunk-style Oliver Twist world called Twist in Time, and its subsequent sequel, which is available now on Amazon.com or on Audible. You can check out either of those books by Brent A. Harris. Make sure that you go buy them. They are fun adventure books set in an exciting world of adventure. You're going to love it. It's got mystery, it's got suspense, it's got a little bit of romance. It's fun for everybody. But before you go buy Brent Harris's book, I want you to hear this original story that he wrote for the podcast called A Pigeon's Promise. It's a sweet story that reminded me of that first little bit of that movie Up. I think it's just going to fill your heart with sweetness and happiness and get you ready for the week ahead. Now, this story was read by Richard Savage. Richard is a native British-speaking voiceover artist, and he does a fantastic job perfectly encompassing the feel of this story that I think is going to put a smile on your face. So before we get to the video, make sure you hit like and subscribe so you can stay up to date on all of the new releases of the Hopefully Prompt podcast series. Now, on to this hopeful story called Pigeon's Promise by Brent A. Harris, read by Richard Savage.
This is A Pigeon's Promise by Brent A. Harris. The old man settled into an old bench across from a fresh tombstone, alone. He sighed as the bench creaked against his movement. There were many such tombstones in the serene cemetery, jutting out like marble teeth, implanted into verdant green gums. He drew out a long, foggy breath and slowly untied the bag slouched across his lap. From inside the bag, he withdrew something resembling a pancake, flat and burnt on both sides. Worn fingers worked at breaking the pancake apart as he awaited his first arrival of the morning. "How do you like your eggs?" The old man, much younger and from a time too long ago to recount, asked his newlywed bride. Usually not so runny. She sat at a cheap card table that served as their kitchen table, in an apartment that was too small to accommodate her large, beaming eyes and bubbly smile. He attempted to examine the contents of the pan through a giant yawn. "Maybe I used too much milk." "You're sweet to get up early with me to make breakfast, but..." She hemmed around the words. Usually, when one asks how they like their eggs, they mean over easy or sunny side up. "You're always sunny side up, Patty," he frowned, taking the pan off the table. The vinyl stuck to it and melted like mozzarella. He shook his head and grimaced again, this time at the ruined table. "I meant it as a joke. I only know how to make 'em scrambled, or I thought I did. Honestly, I don't know why you even married me." "Your culinary skills, for one." Her eyes sparkled. She smirked and pointed a finger toward a skillet on the stove. Smoke billowed over his pancakes. He was quite certain one of them was on fire. "I think you're burning something." She laughed most delightfully. They were called patty cakes from that moment on. Burnt offerings to the woman he loved and who had, despite his rough start, loved him in return. Though his cooking had improved over the years, he was always sure to make a few patty cakes for her on every anniversary and special occasion. The old man crumpled a patty cake up. He waited a moment, and a moment more. A moment after that, he was no longer alone. A small pigeon swooped down. It came from one of many oak trees filled with red-orange and yellowing autumn leaves that stood widely along the myriad pathways of the cemetery. The little fellow landed near the foot of the old man. Perhaps it had been a park pigeon before finding a new home here. It cocked its head and blinked expectantly. He threw a crumb of patty cake out to the bird. It ruffled its wings and backed up as the food landed. Eyeing it, he lurched, taking the bread in its beak. The pigeon opened wide and swallowed hard. It took a few swallows before the patty cake disappeared. "You might want some water after breakfast," the man chuckled. "They're a bit on the dry side." He broke off another piece, this time smaller. Another pigeon joined the party. The man broke off more bread and flung the crumbs skyward as more pigeons joined in the dance, spreading their wings and cooing and darting after the manna. Soon 6 birds found refuge with the old man, gladly gulping down bits of dried, burnt patty cakes. He turned towards the tombstone. "I think they like them almost as much as you did." Of course, she never really liked them, but she loved him and ate them just as greedily. Tears welled in the old man's eyes. Pigeons gave sympathetic coos, or at least that's what he told himself. He took solace in their company, even if it was only for want of breakfast. At least he wasn't alone anymore. He had his wife and his newfound friends. The next morning, the same frenzied flock of 6 or so pigeons happily met the old man at the first sign of food. He had sighed again, settling into the creaking bench. He pulled his jacket tighter. Fall's first leaves had taken flight. "There you go, my darlings," he said, tossing the broken bits of burnt patty cakes their way as the birds vied for the best pieces. To the old man's delight, a new bird joined in, white, with soft golden speckles the colour of the dawn sun and large, curious eyes. It bobbed toward the bench. "Hello there," the man said. He tossed a special piece of patty cake her way. "Would you like some breakfast too? Extra special." With a cocked head, the bird examined the crumb, one eye toward the ground, the other cast toward the cloudy heavens. A ray of sun broke through, illuminating the creature. It ignored the bread and stood there ruffling its feathers. Another nearby bird snatched the food right up. "You missed your chance." The old man gave the new arrival another piece, this one smaller and less burnt. The piece of patty cake sat for a moment until snatched up by yet another bird. The white pigeon with golden specks bristled and crept closer to the bench toward the man. "Well, you're a curious gal, aren't you?" The cemetery was littered with wet leaves. The old man placed a folded blanket on the bench before settling onto it with a sigh. He wrapped another blanket over him. The usual flock formed to fetch their new diet of patty cakes as they had done so each morning since he'd started his routine. The curious pigeon arrived as well, though she did not partake of the offering. Yet she crept a bit closer and closer each time. "You don't like my cooking either," he joked. "I don't blame you. Patty never did either, but she loved me even so." The bird cocked its head at the words, cooed as if in response, and fluttered onto the park bench next to the old man. It settled in, several long inches away. "All right then," the man said. "There's room enough on this bench for 2. The pigeon preened itself, spreading a wing to pick at feathers, then spreading the other, all while ignoring the ruckus of the flock beneath the 2 of them. The old man stared at his wife's tombstone, then back at the bird. "I think I'll call you Patty. Would you like to hear a story?" The old man talked for hours as the bird beside him seemed to listen. The first snow arrived soon after. Oak branches were laid bare like skeletal fingers stretching skyward. First, the folded blanket came, then a heavy sigh, followed by the rustling of a heavy coat, and finally the old man unfurled a plaid blanket over his legs. He placed the bag of bread on his lap, struggling through gloves to untie it and to retrieve the bread within. His flock fought for breadcrumbs, breaking back into disorderly chaos as cold winds and frozen fields kept food scarce. Yet Patty flew over serenely, landing on the bench and began to preen, oblivious to the food but attentive to the tales the old man spoke. A chill wind picked up. Patty ruffled her feathers while the old man shivered and hunched down. She looked at him, bobbed over the remaining inches between the two of them, and hopped up onto the blanket on his lap. "Can I help you?" The pigeon didn't answer. Instead, she found her way into a fold of the blue-green fabric, burrowing her way inside. Once there, she nestled warmly on his left leg. "I don't know quite what to make of you, Patty. You listen to me drone on all day. You ignore my food. Maybe you're alone, too." The old man sighed. "It could just be that you're using me to keep warm, but that's all right. Stay as long as you like." The temperature fell, and the snow rose into banks that threatened to bury his wife's headstone. The old man placed a small folding shovel onto the ground after he had used it to clear Patty's grave and unbury the bench. He wheezed near breathlessly as he collapsed onto a pile of blankets. The pigeons still came, devouring the patty cakes hungrily. Pigeons, the old man had discovered, did not fly south for the winter. He shrugged, looking at them, to his wife's grave, then to the bird on his lap, as he mulled over a difficult decision. When the bag of bread emptied, and a frigid wind whipped away his resolve, he made his choice. He spoke to Patty, who cooed contentedly in her usual spot beneath the blanket on his leg. "I'm sorry, girl. I really am. But I can't keep coming here." His teeth chattered. Not till spring. The pigeon he called Patty wouldn't understand what he was saying, he was sure. But he couldn't bear to break their bond. "I'll come back, I promise, when the winds are warmer and the frost recedes into the first seeds of fresh grass, when the oak trees bud again. Promise me you'll return too." After Patty flapped away, the old man left, leaving behind a blanket on the bench for the bird. When he returned, the sun was renewed, and ice trickled down self-made paths along the walk to the bench. His blanket was gone, but his wife's grave remained. Under his jacket, the old man held a warm bag of freshly burnt pancakes. He took eager steps forward and plunged onto the bench. He flung bits of bread and awaited his flock's arrival. Soon after, several pigeons joined him. A couple he recognized. There were the two usual grey ones, and a new one with darker feathers and a black ridge over its beak scarfed crumbs down readily. Several more came as the ground became sprinkled in patty cakes. He tossed the bread high and happily as the time ticked onward and morning became afternoon. Undeterred, he talked to his wife, he talked to his flock of friends, and he waited. When at last his legs had stiffened to the point of pain, he stood, stooped, and left, lumbering back down the path he had previously bounded up before. A week went by, then another. Every day the old man waited alone on the bench, facing his wife, feeding the pigeons, telling stories. Yet his tales fell flat, for his fast friend was no longer there. "I'm sorry, Patty. I promised I would return, but you had no way of knowing. I didn't abandon you, I promise. Please come back," he whispered, as if in fervent prayer. Day after day, as spring thaws came, a weary old man sighed heavily onto the park bench, and still Patty did not come. A late spring sun peeked beyond the horizon. The cemetery lawn was overgrown. Weeds grew on Patty's grave. "I'm not sure what I'm doing here." The old man crumpled onto the bench. The bag of patty cakes cold and stale. He didn't have the energy to make them fresh every morning. Not that the pigeons cared. Patty had been the only one who had come for his company. For him, not for the bag that he brought. He examined the weeds growing on the grave, the dandelions, the pennywort, and crabgrass. He dropped himself hard to his knees. The pigeons flapped away as he crawled over to yank the nearest intruding weed out by the roots. "I may yet still be able to take care of you, my dear," he grunted, setting to work. He examined the gravesite when he finished, through shallow, weak breaths. Yet his feeling of satisfaction was overshadowed by a feeling that he was being watched through wide, bright eyes. He pushed it out of his mind as tears welled once more into his own. "My dearest, I may soon join you." The presence pushed further into his mind. This time he accepted it and looked up in surprise. On the tombstone, a white pigeon, speckled with the dawn's golden light, cooed softly at him. "Patty," the old man beamed, "you've come back." For a moment he felt as airy as an escaped balloon sailing toward the clouds. "Where have you been?" As if in answer, another bird, grey and plain, but with something fiery and stubborn within its eyes, landed roughly beside Patty. "Oh, you brought a friend, I see." His heart sank for reasons he didn't understand. It couldn't have been jealousy, could it? "Is this why you've not kept your promise?" he chided. Patty cocked her head. A moment later, a tiny bird flew down from a giant oak. The old man breathed softly in quiet understanding. He smiled. "You've gone off and made a family, something Patty and I could never do." Like the balloon, he soared ever higher, joy in his soul. "So that explains it. Oh, I'm so happy for you." The three pigeons preened themselves, feathers sheening. Patty stopped, cocked her head toward the man, and cooed as if in concern. "Yes, I know," said the old man. "Will you promise to visit me when I am gone?" The old man sighed heavily. "One last time." 2 tombstones now stood next to an empty bench. The cemetery was quiet, and the pigeons were all gone save one. Patty perched herself on the newest stone slab. She stretched her wings, one after another, preening herself. She ruffled her feathers, settled down contently, and began to coo softly through the still dawn.